You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host. Now the last podcast that I did was basically introducing the idea of ADD and, some interesting and important points to note. I want to continue with the theme because today what I want to do is I want to do a bit of a comparison between ADD and the presenting symptoms and that of anxiety. Now the reason why I want to do this is because unlike the DSM-3, which is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders, that draws a very strong distinction between the two disorders, I'm actually going to suggest that that way of looking at things is not that simple. It's actually a lot more complex than that. We need to take a lot more into account. This is a multifactorial problem, and I want to demonstrate to everybody who's listening how we need to accommodate our thinking. As I've said before, basically in medicine and psychiatry, the tendency is towards reductionism. That is, we come down to, the small components of something. But as I've always argued, that's not sufficient. We need to look at the human being as a whole. And not only that, but we also need to consider human beings in their context, i.e., what's their external environment like? So, and part of that's culture. Culture comes into all sorts of different forms. So let me dive into this. Let me talk about the diagnostic criteria for ADD, ADHD as in the DSM-5, okay? So fundamentally, ADD, ADHD is now classified into three presentations: predominantly inattentive presentation, predominantly hyperactive, impulsive presentation, and thirdly, a combined presentation. So let me outline the diagnostic criteria then out of the DSM-5, and then let me talk about how that compares to generalized anxiety disorder according to this classification system. Right? So I'm not saying this is gospel, I'm just saying this is how this has been presented in the manual that most psychologists and psychiatrists use these days. Okay, so let me just focus on attention deficit disorder, predominantly inattentive presentation. So it's got a number of criteria. So firstly and foremost, persistent pattern of inattention. And this is evidenced by at least 6 of the following symptoms present for at least 6 months to a degree that is inconsistent with developmental level and negatively impacts directly on social, academic, and occupational activities. So firstly, often fails to give close attention to details or makes careless mistakes. Often has difficulty sustaining attention on tasks or play activities. Often does not seem to listen when spoken to directly. Often does not follow through on instructions and fails to finish schoolwork, chores, or duties in the workplace, not due to oppositional behaviour or failure to understand instructions. Okay, so there's quite a difference there. Often has difficulty organising tasks and activities. often avoids, dislikes, or is reluctant to engage in tasks that require sustained mental effort, such as schoolwork or homework. Often loses things necessary for tasks and activities, i.e., school materials, keys, books, wallets, phones. Is often easily distracted by extraneous stimuli. Is often forgetful in daily activities. Here comes the next level. So if the first lot was A, this is B. Several inattentive symptoms are present prior to the age of 12. C, several inattentive symptoms are present in 2 or more settings, i.e. at home, school or work, with friends or relatives, or in any other activities. D, there is clear evidence that the symptoms interfere with or reduce the quality of social, academic, or occupational functioning. E, the symptoms do not occur exclusively during the course of schizophrenia or any other psychotic disorder, and are not better explained by another mental disorder, e.g., mood disorder, anxiety disorder, dissociative disorder, personality disorder, substance intoxication or withdrawal. Okay, so this is it's interesting, and a large part of this is often dependent on an external observer, right? However, having said that, one of the things that's becoming more prevalent is that people are going to the internet and they're essentially scrolling through diagnostic criteria on their own and self-diagnosing. Now, like with any medical issue, I have a problem with self-diagnosis with any psychological disorder because, let me come at it from a personal point of view. I can go through some of these patterns of inattention, and if I look back on my childhood, I've definitely had at least 6 of those running at some point or another. Now, does that make me someone with attention deficit disorder? And my argument is no, not really, because the symptoms or the patterns of inattention were really dependent on the context that I was in. Okay, so one of the things that I argue strongly with is that if I have a good relationship with a teacher and I'm really engaged, then I'm less likely to have any of these patterns, these persistent patterns of inattention. And so, there is, again, that issue between the individual and the context. I've got a special announcement about how you can work with me. Since starting this podcast, I've had a lot of inquiries from listeners asking how they can work with me on a one-to-one basis. Now, I've finally managed to free up some time to work with about 5 clients privately. Typically, we'll work together for 6 months, applying the ideas I discuss here to help you lead a fulfilled, meaningful, and happy life, and a well-rounded life. If that's something you'd be interested in, drop me an email at gunter@goodmengreat.com and we'll be in touch. So, as a 12-year-old, what was I like? Well, I was having a lot of fun. I did struggle at times keeping my mind on the job, as it were. But was it persistent? And this is now, a lot of our stuff comes down to linguistics or the, how we use language. Okay, so let me contrast this then with what we call generalized anxiety disorder. Okay, and again, these are the DSM-5 criteria. So A, excessive anxiety and worry, apprehensive expectation, occurring more days than not for at least 6 months about a variety of events or activities such as work or school performance. B, the individual finds it difficult to control the worry. C, the anxiety and worry are associated with 3 or more of the following 6 symptoms with at least some symptoms having been present for more days than not for the past 6 months. So, 1. Restlessness or feeling keyed up or on edge. 2. Being easily fatigued. 3. Difficulty concentrating or mind going blank. 4. Irritability. 5. Muscle tension. 6. Sleep disturbance. So that means difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or restless, unsatisfying sleep. D. The anxiety, worry, or physical symptoms cause clinically significant distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of function. E. The disturbance is not attributable to the physiological effects of a substance or any other medical condition. F. The disturbance is not better explained by another mental disorder like anxiety or worry about having panic attacks in panic disorder, negative evaluation in social anxiety disorder, contamination or obsessions in obsessive compulsive disorder, separation from attachment figures in separation anxiety disorder, reminders of traumatic events in post-traumatic stress disorder. So, the picture on the surface looks quite different to ADD, or does it? And this is the thing where I think we need to really begin to dig deep in this. Now, if I run a comparison across these symptomologies, right, I'm going to come up with a few interesting observations. While ADD, which is, again, predominantly inattentive presentation, and generalized anxiety disorder both involve attention-related symptoms, they are considered to be distinct in several ways. Firstly, the nature of symptoms. So ADD primarily involves difficulties with attention, organisation, follow-through on tasks, whereas generalized anxiety disorder is characterized by excessive uncontrollable worry and physical symptoms relating to anxiety. Secondly, we're talking about onset. Fundamentally, ADD symptoms typically have an onset in childhood, while generalized anxiety disorder symptoms may have a later onset and often appear in adulthood. 3. Functional impairment. Both conditions can lead to functional impairment, but ADD primarily affects academic and occupational functioning, while generalized anxiety disorder affects a broad range of life areas due to this excessive worry. 4. Durations. Generalized anxiety disorder symptoms must be present for at least 6 months, while ADD symptoms persist for an extended period but are not necessarily required to be present every day. Okay, so that's quite a significant difference. 5. Treatment. Treatments for ADD often include behavioural interventions and medications like stimulants, whereas generalized anxiety disorder is typically treated with psychotherapy and medications such as antidepressants or anti-anxiety drugs. Now, this is where it gets really, really important. It is absolutely fundamentally important to consult a qualified healthcare professional for a comprehensive assessment and accurate diagnosis. This is not to be done on your own reconnaissance, in a sense, because when I go through what I've just done, as an experienced clinician, I can actually already pinpoint some strengths and weaknesses in the diagnoses of both ADD and generalized anxiety disorder. So the picture is not as straightforward as this makes it out to be. And for a start, we need to also consider the sort of theory that this hangs on. You know, do we have a medical theory, a psychological theory? Do we have a biopsychosocial model? What is it that we're working with to explain the sorts of issues that we have in people's functioning. So I'm not necessarily only looking at symptoms, but I'm also looking at how the person really functions in their life. And that's a really important difference. So the reason why I've done this is for some clarity. Now, having said that, it's actually a lot more complicated than that. And that's what I want to pick up in the next podcast, is I want to look at a deep dive into how we can, not just compare, but also understand ADD and generalized anxiety disorder better. Because what we got, in my view, doesn't quite crack the problem. There's issues about, the frequency in the population of both of those disorders, whether it's ADD, ADHD, or whether it's generalized anxiety disorder. If 1 in 20 people are experiencing ADD, that's a huge number. So we want to pick out, in comparison, how many people experience generalized anxiety disorder. Okay, so I'm going to put a lot of this together to begin to sort of see what is it that we're going. Looking at it from a neurological, biological, psychological function, but then also in another episode I want to talk about how we can maybe approach the problem from different angles, like, maybe biological anthropology has something to say about this, or medical anthropology. Can we get a broader or deeper understanding of the issues when we're including other areas of study? This is really, really important. Quite often we come out of our training with actually quite a narrow understanding of how human beings actually function. So I want to take that up further. So I hope this has been useful. I'm really at this point simply trying to stimulate your minds to begin to critically think about what is presented to you. Okay, it's a bit like, on another level, let me go to a really big level, it's, are men and women more different than similar? This is very similar to this, okay? How different is ADD from generalized anxiety disorder, or how similar ultimately are they in the person's experience? Because I think that's one of the really important aspects of this. Because the other phenomenon is really interesting, which is, why has ADD exploded into the public conscious the way that it does, when a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people, suffer from generalized anxiety disorder? Okay, until the next episode, this is me signing off. Please, critical thinking is fundamentally important in change, and so is reflection. Please think about this, reflect on it, and see what your experience may be in both of these areas. So until next time, this is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.guntersvoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.